Yeah, well, I love how this stage is from the morning here talking about stress. I mean, talk about organizing an event and running a company and all sorts of other things. Definitely increases stress. So you're aging faster than you think, and the challenge and the fix is understanding why. So what I'm going to tell you about today is, as Emil mentioned, the various types of aging clocks that are out there. I could talk for 4 hours on that topic alone. I'm not going to. I got 20 minutes. So I've picked the 3 that are probably most common for you guys. So as it says up there, I do a lot of things in my life, but my main bulk of my time is spent as a health coach, actually, while trying to run a company at the same time and building this awesome event. And that's really why I've gotten such an interest for this, because over the last 10 plus years, I have spent so much time looking at stress data and health data that you won't believe it. It's probably too much. And why do we do that? Well, I do it because I am, like many others in here, bitten by this bug of wanting to live as long and healthy as possible. Not necessarily until I get 120, not at all. I just want to make sure that when I die with my boots on, meaning on a mountain, happy, active. I do not want to be burdened by disease. So you may have seen this slide before, but as a kind of prelude to these aging clocks discussions here, you may have heard about Peter Attia, famous doctor from New York. He came up with this equation that longevity is really the function of health span and lifespan. And it's all about, as I mentioned, extending life without disease. That's what I work with on an everyday basis, and that's what I'm going to dive into here. A little bit first about some of the people I work with, and here's some interesting stuff from that, because we work a lot with executives, we work a lot with pro athletes. We've done some interesting stress work with the Navy SEALs, and I have to say that we also work with very normal people, not just these fancy folks up there. And more, quote-unquote, normal people are getting into this because nobody really wants to get burdened by disease. But there's some funny things that I want to tell you before we go into the clocks here. This is what the average week looks like for a World Tour rider. Very linear, very simple to look at. There's a balance in their lives. There's a balance between training and recovery. So this is not my stress talk, but still, notice this picture versus this picture of our average client. The average client has a lot more impact on their lifestyle than the World Tour rider. And what does this do? Well, all these red bars there are accelerating stress in their body one way or the other. Stress can be good, stress can be bad. You have to find the balance. And I'll get back to why that is important. Because stress is driving so much of the diseases that we're seeing in today's world, and kind of things that can be prevented, right? Stress is something we can deal with, but how do we know if we're actually stressed? So let's dive into that. Before we do that, I want to ask you guys, what are you tracking today? So please stand up if you're using wearables to track your health. All right. And what about blood samples? Who's using that to track your health? Good. DNA test? Not so many yet. What about epigenetic tests? Of course, Emil is over there. And I just realized I forgot my water. Olivia, do you mind bringing my water from there? Thank you. Amazing. So that was a little test. So what I'm going to tell you about today are the 3 most common ones that I see. At least here in a Danish/European perspective. So Whoop being the Whoop band. Raise your hand if you have a Whoop band. Not that many. Okay. Oura ring. A lot more. Oura being the great guys from Finland who invented it over 10 years ago now. Really an interesting device. There's a ring here that you can wear to track a lot of things we'll get into in a second. What about these guys called the Clock Foundation? Probably none of you have heard of them. A few? Great. What about TrueAge? Right. Okay. So this is in the deep end of the pool, given my background with the biohacking community here. But let's dive into the difference between Whoop and Oura. So if you know Whoop, you'll know them from they're very focused on athletes. They're very focused on recovery. They're very focused on, as it says up here, they've got this new Whoop age, right? But how is that constructed, and can you trust it? That's really what I'm here to tell you about, because it tracks your sleep, that's great. It tracks your strain, that's also amazing. It tracks heart rate recovery. We've got a great speaker here on heart rate recovery, or heart rate variability, sorry, as well, so I'll encourage you to look into that. It tracks steps, it tracks activity in terms of intensity and all of that, and that's great. And all of that is built into one metrics that they call the biological age, or the Whoop biological age. But it's really only based on assessments based on these kind of wearable data, kind of against the 250,000 population set that they picked up. And they really didn't do much other than compare that to things like VO2 max proxy data. So VO2 max is a very important marker for longevity, but often using wearables, it's just a proxy. It's not a proper measurement as you would do wearing an oxygen mask, kind of, measuring the gases out and all the things that you do when you're on a bike and doing a proper assessment. So the accuracy there obviously cascades into the accuracy of this age clock that they've done by Whoop. It's good, but it's not perfect. So what about Oura? Oura has for years, almost a decade now, really been the masters of sleep tracking. They have nailed that bit. But they've also nailed what they do with heart tracking. So they have a sensor that really picks up the pulse wave velocity of how your veins are kind of contracting and how the blood is pumping through your veins in the finger, obviously. We'll go back to the flaws in a minute, but why is that important? Well, it's important because your heart health, obviously, is going to tell you a lot about your risk of getting a cardiac arrest or risk of getting some kind of heart disease. So understanding that is really what you need to do when you look at your Oura data, if you have an Oura ring. And this, by the way, what's on the Oura picture there on the left, or what would that be, your right, that will be my data. So I'm 4 years younger cardiovascular-wise, and I don't use the Whoop at the moment, so I don't have the Whoop data with me. But what I want to show with that is that despite an active life, despite stress, I'm still 4 years younger in my veins, so to speak. That's great. I'll get back to how that has changed in the last 5 months. Before we do that, a little bit deeper dive into Oura, just to, again, I'm not really trying to disencourage you from using any of these devices, but I'm trying to give you the full picture so that you know what you're looking at. And when it comes to Oura and their heart health score, it's pretty high up there when you look at trust. And this trust score that I've put up there, I'll have to say it's my own assessment of that, just based on all the things I've read about their algorithm, all the things that I've come across on various geeky forums discussing these types of things. But if you read the white paper behind their heart rate metrics, there's an 85% correlation of these little signals that the rings are picking up. 85% correlation with ultrasound scans of about 500 hearts. So that's great. But the problem is Oura doesn't really reveal whether those hearts are American hearts or Danish hearts. And there's a big difference between an American heart and a Danish heart. So one could argue that if they were to do this on more of a European population, but we don't know whether it's an American heart or a European heart, it would probably be better in my case. And one of the other things to be aware of when you're using devices like this is the importance of how you're wearing it. So things like, is the ring sitting tight on your finger? Is it too tight? I'm changing the position of my ring when I sleep because all you guys' finger will kind of bulk up a little bit during the night. So you'll swallow your hands when you're sleeping. So for that reason, it's a good idea to put the ring on a finger that's a little bit smaller than the one you're using it during the day. That's how you get an accurate measurement. If you don't do that, you can get some really wonky measurements. And the other thing to be aware about is that if you have really cold hands, that can also influence the data from Oura. Okay? Again, I'm not trying to discourage you from using this. I just want you to be aware and maybe think about how you can do, change some of these things. The picture that I put up there, that's this guy I found on a Reddit forum that he's minus 14 years, right? That's pretty amazing. And you can't probably read this, but he says he's 48 years old, he doesn't exercise, he's been eating a plant-based diet, no meat, no fish, no chicken for 27 years. I'm not advocating not to eat animal protein, not at all. But it's interesting how he is probably an outlier in their data set, and as such comes out really wonky. I'm not sure I would be so, necessarily ecstatic about that score if I knew how the, score was put together. When it comes to Whoop, that's a different beast. It looks way more on the activity side. It looks way more, as I mentioned, about how the athlete or the non-athlete is really working through the day, and it's mainly correlated to this VO2 max. So it's not as accurate, in my opinion, when it comes to understanding the risk of particularly heart disease as Oura is focused on. And that's really all I have to say about these two measurements. They're great, they're motivating, especially Whoop. If you were to talk about flaws, Whoop are known to be over-exaggerating the cheering of the user, which is great. You're motivated by it, right? And that's what we need. As Susanna was mentioned, you need to find your why. You need to understand why do you want to go into this. So it's really important. But there's a new kid on the block, and that's really looking into the genetics. So without spending hours on this, there's a difference between DNA and epigenetics. Real quick, epigenetics is the science of understanding which genes are switched on and which genes are switched off. Yes, genes have on and on switches, as simple as that. It's called methyl groups, not going to get into that, but basically, when you change your lifestyle, you are changing which genes are switched on and which genes are switched off. And for, let's say, the heart, we have thousands of genes controlling various functions in the heart, and once you start to understand that, and that is what science is doing, you, according to the the average of the most popular scientists out there looking into these kind of things, you can influence 80 to 90% of your future health by trying to regulate which genes are switched on and which genes are switched off. That's impressive. So who's looking into that? Well, there's some guys at something called the Clock Foundation that have done this. The Clock Foundation is based out of UCLA, and a guy named Steve Horvath, who's known as the father of epigenetic testing, which is this measurement of biological age, really. It's how it all originated. They've done this clock called GrimAge version 2, and that's the most accurate to date out there on the market if you want to measure biological age. And they've done an update on that recently. It's called systems aging. And the way that uses data is basically looking at all of these genes, and then they've compared that to something called the Framingham study. The Framingham study is an amazing American study, again, remember that, running over 3 decades by now. Started in 1948, 5,000 people, measuring 2 times a year, blood biomarkers, picking all sorts of data out of that, correlating that with what's called hazard ratios, meaning what kind of diseases will people develop over those decades, and what did they die of if they are dead by now. They keep tracking them, it still goes on. So it's a very, very different way of looking at age than some of these biomarkers coming from our wearables. We're not yet there where those can be kind of compared to this. So what you have to be aware of there is also some flaws in the way to do that. So for instance, it used to be the thing that we do it in saliva. Saliva is great. It picks up the kind of real-time moment of the person. Like Emil was mentioned, if you're in a super stressed situation, saliva-based tests will pick that up versus, if you want a little bit more of a stable view of your epigenetic kind of data, meaning which genes are switched on and off, blood is better for that. Otherwise, it can skew the results quite a bit. So without getting into too much detail, I want to reveal to you my age, and this is not to brag. In fact, you'll get into why it's not bragging at all. But over the last many years, my biological age has been quite low. Like, I'm 32, biologically speaking, but my body is actually, or my chronological age is 45-ish. So that's amazing, and I've done a lot of work to do that. And this test over there is, as you can say, or see maybe, it's got a cellular marker, it's got a brain marker, a kidney marker, muscle, et cetera. All of that is coming from certain tissue samples that these guys have used. Again, looking at the genetics, it switches on and off. How does that compare to certain tissue types, lung tissue, brain tissue, et cetera, to understand the on and on switch combinations. Compare that to me, my age, my sex, et cetera. So if it's green up there on the screen, it means that I am younger than the average for my sex and age. That's great. But look at that. So over the last 5 months, I have added 8 years to my biological age. 8 years coming from high stress. Think of that. And this is where Whoop and Oura gets back into the game. Have I known that? Absolutely. Have I tracked that? Absolutely. Am I aware of what's stressing me? Apart from this conference? Absolutely. Legal matters, all sorts of interesting things. That is why it's important to understand these things, because not only I haven't really figured out the details, or I haven't noted it up here anyway, but as you can tell, if you just compare these two, one of the most important ones for me, given my genetics, is the vascular one, because I have a real high risk for developing cardiovascular disease, and that's gone in the wrong direction, which I do not like. So that's why I'm so keen on really getting out to you guys with understanding that you can measure some of these things, and you have to be aware of how things are changing and what's impacting them, because lifestyle controls your future risk for any disease, at least by 80 to 90%. So understanding what is the key. And I can talk for hours on this. This is what we work with on a daily basis with our clients, so come grab me if you're interested. But really just in summary, again, based on the assessment that I've done here, looking at all the studies, Whoop, I would give a trust score of 5 out of 10. Oura, 7 out of 10. These guys from Clock Foundation at UCLA, the science, white coat, lab coat type guys, 9 out of 10. And I know Emil mentioned that what about this thing you use in the fitness center? I'll give that a 2 out of a 10. I mean, a lot of these weights, they're interesting, they're fun, and they're motivating, but really I would rather use Whoop or Oura to be honest. And I say that with the utmost respect to some of the guys from Technodim over there that I know have done something recent, which I've yet to analyze, so I'll probably have to update this in a few months once I get a deep dive on that. But what do you want to take away from this? Well, I think one of the questions we often get asked from our clients is, well, what do I do? Do I use this or the other? I don't know. Well, actually, what matters most are trends. Because as you just saw in my data, in just 5 months, you can change these things significantly by altering your lifestyle, stress being a huge impacting factor on your lifestyle. So trends matters most. That's really what I'm going to end this talk on. And don't really be discouraged by this. Be motivated, hopefully, by understanding there is a way for you to look into your body at a deeper level. If you have some family history of certain things, well, maybe this type of deeper analysis would be better for you. If you're generally not concerned about your health, well, maybe you just start with a Whoop or an Oura ring to track the most basic things and know that that does give you some leeway in terms of reducing your risk of dying of basically any disease. So I want to leave this last slide here with some time for questions, if there's any questions. Lots. Where do we start, Emil? You're getting your exercise in today.
2 minutes, Martin.
2 minutes.
Okay. So which one? Where is you? Well, this is the gentleman who is closest.
That's
yes.
okay.
You mentioned that you were tracking particularly your vascular health. Without prying too much into your private life, what risk factors cause you to focus on that?
So I have a genetic predisposition for increased LPA, which is inflamed LDL particles, and along comes the risk of Alzheimer's, along comes the risk of basically any heart disease known to man. So that's why.
Okay, we have one more here. Sorry, I'm running.
Yep.
Here you go, sir.
Thank you. Do you currently track cortisol somehow?
Yes.
How?
For the time being, we're tracking it in the saliva test. So cortisol awakening response, 3 tests in the morning, and then 1 in the afternoon and 1 in the evening, just to track how cortisol fluctuates during the day. I'm aware there are some interesting Danish startups working on cortisol trackers that are 24/7, which I really look forward to. So that will be my answer for today. Thank you so much, guys.